Welcome to my art studio. Today we're going to be looking at the differences between watercolor, acrylic, and oil paints. And maybe this will give you an idea of what you want to start painting with as a beginner. And hopefully you can learn something new. We'll also go over price and material differences between each of these different mediums. Hopefully you can learn something from this. So let's get started. So today we're going to be I'm just going to be doing two little small canvases for the oils and acrylics. And then I'm going to cut out a page just the same size as these canvases for the watercolor on this watercolor paper. Okay, first let's go over the oils. So oil, I feel like you need the most materials for. And it's I feel like, more complex than the other two. You need more things, you need specialized brushes, and all sorts of things like that. I personally wouldn't start painting with oil, but it does have a lot of different feel that is easier to use than maybe acrylic. Here I have a box of things that you might want to use. So first we have this paint palette, which you don't need, especially beginning. You can use like a paper plate or something like that. So obviously you'll need oil colors. I got these from Michael's and they're Artist Loft, and these were, I think, $15. So you'll also need, this is my paint thinner. You don't need a glass like this. You can put paint thinner in a old cup or something, but you'll need paint thinner to get the paint out of your brushes. This is linseed oil. I use this for making the paint flow better on the canvas. It also helps your paint become thinner if you need to thin out your paint. And here are some brushes that I use. These are specific brushes for oil paints. For watercolor and acrylic, a lot of times those brushes can go either way. They can work for watercolor or acrylic, but many times with oil you need your specific brushes for that. You need a canvas, so there's no like paper like there is for watercolor and sometimes acrylic. You'll always need to paint on a canvas, which can be a little bit more expensive. Now moving on to acrylics. So here I have a bunch of different acrylic colors. This is Fine Touch from Hobby Lobby. I have really enjoyed these colors. I've had them for about a year or so. So here are some different brushes I have for acrylic. Of course, you don't need all of these brushes when you're first starting out. And another thing you'll need is a cup for water, which you can use just a disposable cup. Acrylic, you can buy mediums that help your paint not dry as fast, because with acrylic they dry super fast. So you either have to paint really fast or you have to know how to layer really well on top of dry paint. With oil, on the other hand, it dries really slow, so you can actually like leave your painting overnight and come back to it. It'll still be wet and easy for blending. And then mediums, what I was talking about, I use this Floetrol, which is a really great medium for acrylic. Many times people use it for acrylic pouring, which I as well do, but I also like to use it in my normal paints because it just thins out the paint a little bit instead of using a lot of water. But you can use water if you're just starting out. So now let's move on to watercolor. So with watercolor, you have a few different options. So you can get paints like these, which come in little tubes that are similar to what the acrylics looked like. Or you can get a palette like this. Now I don't use watercolor a lot, so I don't know a ton about it, but today I'm going to experiment around with it. I do know you can buy this watercolor paper, which is a lot cheaper than canvases. So if you're looking for something that's super inexpensive, I think watercolor might be what you want to start out with. And the same with acrylics, you'll need a cup for water to wash your brushes out and to dilute the paint a little bit so you can have a nice variation of different grades of colors. All right, as you can see, I'm going to start out with these watercolors. I have taped down a perfect square the size of those other canvases. The reason I've taped it down is because we don't want the paper to crumble up when the water gets on it. Now, I am sort of a beginner when it comes to watercolors, and I've only used them once or twice, so this will be an interesting experience for all of us. All right, I'm going to use these same brushes that I also have for my acrylic paints because they work with both watercolor and acrylic. Now I have a cup here for washing my my brushes, and then I have another cup here of water for diluting colors. All right, I'm gonna start by getting my brush a little bit wet. I'm gonna dip into this blue. I think I need a little bit more water here. So the more water you add, the lighter the color will be. The more paint you add, the darker it will be. I'm gonna try to do like a little bit of a gradient here, where it goes from a darker blue down to a lighter blue. All right, that's my kind of gradient. So I'm trying to go for like the top part of the sky is darker than the horizon. Now I'm just gonna paint my favorite thing to paint, which is pine trees. And I'm gonna paint it the same way I would paint with acrylic or oil, just to see how it works. So that's interesting the way it's gotten. It went from dark because I had a lot of water on it, or a lot of paint, and I added water to it as I went down, and it got lighter. So I'm gonna try something. I'm just gonna paint some of these just like really big in the background, and then paint more as I get closer to the front. That might be a technique that is harder to do with other paints. All right, that'll be it for those big ones. And I'm gonna add a few of these smaller ones too. Okay, I thought something that might be cool is if we add like another little layer of small little, really dark ones. So I think some pros and cons. Pro, I really like how you can do the diluting and layering. I feel like that is a characteristic of watercolor that is hard to duplicate in acrylic or oil. I think this is like, the setup is great. With this, I think I spent $5 on it. And you're just using watercolor paper, which is much cheaper than canvases, but that might also be a downside because canvases are easier to put on the wall or sell. But I think watercolors are a fantastic place to start when you begin painting. Okay, here we are with the acrylics. I have my palette of colors. I also have a palette. You don't have to have a palette, but you can use a paper plate or something like that. I have the Floetrol I talked about earlier, as well as the tiny canvas, my water to wash my my brushes, the paper towel, and my brushes. All right, so I'm gonna try to do almost the same thing as the watercolor, just to get kind of an example of all three with the same sort of image. So for that gradient, like I did on the watercolor, you have to use white instead of water to get that kind of gradient. I'll even use that same brush I used at the beginning. Now I'm gonna take a little bit of this Floetrol and maybe cover the canvas really quickly. Now you can do this with water as well. Floetrol is just a medium that can replace water. The reason you would want to do that is because acrylic paint has some specific molecules in which water doesn't bond to, like paint or the mediums, and it can cause your paint to crack sometimes. And what this does, it makes it easy for the paint to just flow on the canvas. I'm gonna hold it, make it a little easier. So one benefit I'm seeing with this acrylic versus the watercolor we just did is I love how you can see kind of like the different variations of color, and they blend a little bit, so you can see different variations like in a normal sky would have. So I'm going to use this same brush. This is the one I used for the watercolor as well. I'm going to take some black. I'm just going to take a little bit of it and mix it in with the white, the extra white I have up here. I already feel like that watercolor of this painting is going to turn out a lot better. See, these are the back trees that I did in that other one, but they're not like in the background like that was because of the diluting with the water. Something that I'm having a little bit of a problem with here that I didn't in the watercolor was that the back painting, the colors are mixing in with these colors, making it a little bit difficult to make it the same color that I have on my paintbrush. right, I'm not gonna do that fourth or that third layer like I did on the other one. But I would say some pros and cons. I like that this is on a little canvas. I think it makes it look cute. Pro, I think it's really much easier to add the sky background, and I think it looks a lot better than the one on the watercolor. Like I said, the background does look a lot better on the acrylic. The gradient of the trees I really like on the watercolor. I think some things were easier for your brush to slide across on this acrylic one. But I do think the overall trees look so good on this watercolor. So far, I'm thinking, as far as everything combined, I think watercolor is a better medium to start out with at the beginning. But I also believe that acrylic is almost just as good to start with as a beginner. They're both super easy to get and easy to use, because you just need basically the paints, whatever you're going to paint on, so a canvas or a piece of paper, and water and brushes. All right, let's get started with the oil here. So right here I have my paint thinner. This is my linseed oil, my colors, my paint palette, and my canvas. And I have two brushes here. This is my big brush for making the background, and this will be the one I use for the trees. So this brush you can actually use with all mediums: watercolor, acrylic, and oil. So let's get started. I'm just gonna dip my big brush into this linseed oil just a tiny bit, and that will cover the entire canvas. I have a bit much with this linseed oil. Oops. If you have too much, then it will make painting really hard. I'm just gonna take my paper towel and dip it on there, because the linseed oil makes the paint just like slide on over the canvas super easily. If you put too much on there, it will slide way too much. So let's just try to get some of that off. You don't need like hardly any to cover even a huge canvas. Okay, as you can see, it's like super shiny. This is Artist Loft. I paid like $15 for this. The oil is much easier to blend than acrylic, and I feel like even watercolor too. So that created a nice variation. Now, this is all dirty, and you can't use water with oil, so you have to use the paint thinner to clean off your brush. When you do this, you either want to move this far away from your canvas, or move your canvas far away. Since that's super easy to do, I'll just do this. And you just kind of go back and forth. Even just a little drop on your canvas, it will take away all the paint in that little spot, and you'll see right onto the white canvas. So you don't want to do that. It will ruin your painting. I have a bucket down here where I just put my brush and I go like this. When you do this, you want to make sure your canvas is also far. So this is similar to the acrylic. Another hard thing about oil is since it's like really wet, the blue might get into your tree. See how there was blue on my brush right after I did that line. For some techniques, that makes oil like the best to use. So that makes it the easiest. Okay, so to compare, I still think that I like the watercolor the best for this particular painting. Now, we already talked about the characteristics of watercolor and acrylic, so let's talk about the characteristics of oil versus these two. It has a very nice blending characteristic. So unlike acrylic and watercolor, from what I could tell from this, is that it's a little bit harder to blend colors so much. In oil, it's super easy because it's like, it stays wet for a really long time and you're able to use lots of different colors and blend on colors that are already on there. For this painting, we didn't use any blending at all. So that's just a characteristic you might want to know, depending on what you want to start with. I personally would say not to start with oil because it does involve a lot of different things like the oil and the paint thinner, the special brushes that you can't use over into acrylic and watercolor. So it's going to be more expensive to use oil versus either acrylic or watercolor. And what's fun about starting with either one of these is if you get paintbrushes, lots of times you can carry them over for when you start your next medium. So if you choose to move on to acrylic or watercolor after you've already started with one of them, you have some of the supplies already. I do think oil is a great medium, maybe just to move to once you've had a little bit of practice with the other mediums first, or just one. I started painting with oil after I started with acrylic and haven't yet really gotten into watercolor. So I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope it helped you decide what you want to start painting with. Thanks for watching, and be sure to read the blog that has some more detailed information about prices and where to get your supplies and other things like that. Thanks.